Bleav in Records, and not the good ones. Here on Bleav in White Sox on Monday, September 23rd, 2024. The Chicago White Sox are just one loss away from securing the all time winning percentage dubious record. I can't call it losing percentage because that's not actually what it's called, but effectively losing percentage. Because the 1962 Mets were 40 and 120. They did not play the first game of the year. They did not play the last game of the year. So the White Sox have a chance to avoid the record by winning out the rest of the season. That would put them at 42 and 120. But more than likely, with 3 games to go in Detroit to finish out the regular season, that more than likely is not going to happen. Last homestand of the year against the Angels starting tomorrow night. And I don't know what that's going to be worth for anybody involved. But the White Sox have thoroughly proven down the stretch that things need to be rebooted, things need to be restarted. And it's not like we didn't know that. It's been very interesting watching the White Sox social media administration go from basically subtly posting their final scores and losses to actually putting up really funny things, such as look at the MLB app or that one meme of the car like turning sharply off the highway saying post final score, anything else. It makes you think that the White Sox are good with this. And there was a tweet that I saw a little bit earlier today. I think the guy's name is Nick Peraza, and I'm going to pull it up here on the phone because I don't want to look away from the camera. By the way, this is Bleav in White Sox for those of you that are watching or listening as I look like a total millennial. Gosh, I can't even remember what it is at this point. You see, this is my problem. I effectively uh, have the attention span of a rodent, apparently. So whatever point I was going to make, I'm not actually going to be able to make it at this point. But the White Sox are not going to end up in Cleveland Spiders territory because the Spiders lost 134 games. But we talk about modern baseball and we talk about, the post World War II era. And this is going to be the worst team statistically in the post World War II era. And there's nothing that you can say about watching the on field performance of this team. Okay, I know exactly what I was going to say. All right. So forgive me for stumbling through the first couple of minutes. I saw a stat that, and this is kind of all you need to know about what the White Sox have done this season, that the White Sox run differential, and I don't have the exact number, but I'm just going to round because I think that it's significant. The White Sox have a negative 100 run differential in just the seventh and the eighth innings alone this year. Think about that. In the seventh and the eighth innings alone, they have a run differential of negative 100. That shows you that this team has been competitive in games, but they lose so many games because their bullpen is that bad. Their pitching as a whole is that bad. And there's very little at this point to really be encouraged about going into next season. And I think that the Jeff Passan article did about as good of a job as you could have imagined about trying to describe a team that is playing through the worst stretch of baseball. And look, it's the worst stretch of baseball this year that we will have ever seen in the history of modern Major League Baseball. If you are a player at the major league level, you have had the talent to work your way up through high school, some players through college, other players not, but through the minor leagues. And you have been, at one point in your life or another, you have been the best player on your team. You have been the best player in your area. Players are not used to, athletes are not used to failing at a cataclysmic level. The 2024 White Sox have guys that are experiencing failure that they've never experienced before, and will probably never experience again. Andrew Vaughn won the Golden Spikes Award in 2018 with the California Golden Bears. That is given to the best player in college baseball that year. He was drafted third overall in the 2019 MLB first year player draft. Andrew Vaughn is going to be a part of this team for the whole year. He's basically the only position player on this team, Andrew Benintendi as well. But he's the only position player on this team that has basically been in the lineup day in and day out for the entirety of the year and was not traded. He is going to suffer the worst year of his baseball life. Now, Andrew Vaughn, you look at what his stats are in the microcosm of what the White Sox season is, you might think, well, maybe not that bad. 19 homers, 67 runs batted in, a 246 average, which is not good, and an on base percentage of 298. So, not what you expected from a former Golden Spikes Award winner and somebody that at this point should have developed a little bit further. But maybe there is a future in Andrew Vaughn. Now, I have the issue with, the Andrew Benintendi contract. He's still going to end up as a negative WAR player. But 19 homers and 60 runs batted in, hitting 224. He's just such a defensive liability. And Andrew Vaughn, I think, is also at the point where he might be a permanent DH. So you've got basically two guys that are permanent DHs that you can probably trade Vaughn, but you're not going to be able to trade Benintendi. And I look at this from the lens of, psychologically, after 120 losses, how do some of these guys even feel about coming back next year? Because who are the guys that are on this team now that you're going to see back next year? And we'll get into a little bit of that in our second segment, which is the Ken Rosenthal piece. And I wanted to address that a little bit earlier last week, but I had a couple of things going on and was not able to actually get to that. But I think where the White Sox are at this point is a team that effectively has been burned to the ground. And given that Chris Getz is in no danger of losing his job and Jerry Reinsdorf is not selling the team, and it's hard to do this as a White Sox fan, you have to trust, and trust is a difficult word when it comes to the Chicago White Sox. You have to trust that they are going to build this thing back to a competitive level. And I don't see that at the moment. But I also think that when you talk about, and I was thinking about this last night, and I think that it was maybe the most significant aha moment that I had as an observer. It's hard to call myself a fan of the White Sox. I am a fan of the White Sox, but it's hard to call myself a fan of the White Sox at this point just based upon how poorly they have treated their fan base in terms of the decisions that they have made on the field, and almost in a matter of we don't care, starting with the hiring of Tony La Russa because Jerry Reinsdorf wanted it that way. But I think that the aha moment for me came when talking about who you're going to hire as the next manager. And I got started thinking about this when it was announced that the Reds, just a year after they gave him a contract extension, fired David Bell. The Reds have a lot of young talent. And I don't think anybody expected that the Reds were going to win the NL Central this year. I think a lot of people predicted it was either going to be the Cubs or the Cardinals. I think a lot of people were surprised that the Brewers were going to stay as competitive as they were, given the fact that they traded away Corbin Burns. But it got me thinking, about states of the organization. The Reds are an organization that has a lot of young talent. They have maybe one of the most exciting players in all of baseball in Ellie De La Cruz. Any manager that comes into a situation in Cincinnati is going to have Ellie De La Cruz and a significant amount of position player talent. Plus, you got Hunter Green, who I still think has the potential to be an all star. Was he an all star this year? I want to look that up because I'm not sure if Hunter Green was an all star or not. Forgive me for not knowing this off the top of my head. I need to actually be prepared. Yes, Hunter Green was an all star this past year, and he has had a really good year 2.83 ERA, 146 innings of work, 166 strikeouts. He's turning into the guy that everybody thought that he could be. But my point is that any manager that takes the job in Cincinnati is going to have a good situation to walk into. The Seattle Mariners have one of the best rotations in baseball, and even though he has not played up to what he was the last 2 years, you still have a dynamic superstar in Julio Rodriguez. You've got a really good shortstop in JP Crawford. And you've got a franchise catcher in Cal Raleigh, even though Cal Raleigh isn't hitting for a high average. The Mariners are a pitching factory at this point. Any manager, assuming that they don't keep Dan Wilson, any manager that walks into Seattle is going to walk into a really, really good situation. My point in all of this being, and we don't know what's going to happen with Bud Black and the Colorado Rockies. They just celebrated him being the franchise's all-time winningest manager. I don't think you can put the failures of the Rockies on Bud Black. Miami, I think, is the biggest question mark of all during this upcoming offseason because Skip Schumacher is going to go from manager of the year in the National League to potentially out of a job. But again, that's based on a lot of the, how do you put it, uh, front office dealings that screwed Kim Ng out of a job during last offseason. I think there's a potential that the Washington Nationals end up moving on from Davey Martinez, especially surrounding everything with this CJ Abrams gambling scandal out at Rivers Casino near O'Hare. I thought that was a fascinating storyline from over the weekend that he's getting sent to Single A, whose season is over because he was out to a casino until 8 in the morning. But my point being is that there are a lot of really good managerial jobs to walk into. Entering the 2023 season, you would make the argument that the Texas Rangers were one of the best situations to walk into. And that's why they were able to hire Bruce Bochy. I think you could have hired Bruce Bochy if you were the Chicago White Sox entering the 2021 season because they were in that good of a situation. I don't think Bruce Bochy, I'll scratch that. Bruce Bochy may have considered the White Sox entering 2023 after coming off a year where they were 500. You would not be able to hire somebody like Bruce Bochy now. I've taken a long time to actually get to my point, so I'm actually going to get to my point now. The White Sox, in a season where they could potentially lose 125 games, that's going to mean that they finish 1-5 over the last 6 games. You are basically starting from ground zero organizationally. It's not just managing the team on the field. It's your analytics department. It is your scouting department. It's your player development department, which to me has been the biggest issue for the White Sox for a long time. And having worked in the minor leagues, I can tell you that the White Sox do not put nearly as much into their player development as some of the other organizations do. You want to look at the budget, at least the Dodgers for their minor league system. That I remember working in leagues that had Dodger affiliates in them. They had their own chef that traveled in a trailer from city to city, cooking these players their own food. They had triple the daily food budget of every other organization in baseball for their minor leaguers. And it's no question why the Dodgers have effectively become the perfect organization because they will spend at the big league level and they will develop at the minor league level. Any manager that comes in and is offered the job with the Chicago White Sox is going to demand several things: expansion of analytics, overhaul of player development, evaluation and alteration of domestic and international scouting. And they are also going to need a buyout clause in their contract that is a massive payment if they are fired early. This manager will have to have a minimum 5-year contract if they are going to take this job. A good manager. And if it is a manager that we have never heard of or that does not have the right experience, and we see that the contract is 3 years, we know that this is a Jerry Reinsdorf hire. I'm not saying AJ Pierzynski couldn't be a good manager. I think catchers end up being very good managers. But I don't trust the organization to hire the right guy and give him the right assurances to get the organization back in a position where it can win. Because no manager walking into this job right now is going to be able to say, I can make this a playoff team next year. No manager in their right mind could legitimately say that the Chicago White Sox, under my leadership, are going to be a playoff team next year. That can't happen. It won't happen. So, I don't know how you spin it if you are trying to hire a manager. All I can say is that I think that this organization has gotten themselves so far in the hole that this season is ruining the reputation, if not has already ruined the reputation, of the Chicago White Sox in the eyes of people that either want to come coach here or sign here. And I think that, more than anything else, gives us a great segue into our second segment talking about Jerry Reinsdorf and the piece written by Ken Rosenthal and Britt Ghiroli in The Athletic. So I wanted to wrap up talking about the piece that came out on Thursday, written by Ken Rosenthal and Britt Ghiroli of The Athletic, about Jerry Reinsdorf and how his ownership style has effectively gotten the White Sox into this unenviable position of rising from the doldrums. The title of the article I thought was interesting. An owner who thinks he knows everything led the White Sox to historic disaster. And it's pretty clear throughout the entire piece that Jerry Reinsdorf, being a big baseball buff and somebody that was a baseball fan his entire life growing up in Brooklyn, thinks that his experiences make him a good owner and that he meddles in everything regarding baseball operations. I think we've seen that in sports, the best owners are most oftentimes the hands off owners. Being a Bay Area native and being somebody that can remember the Oakland Raiders when Al Davis was still alive, it kind of screams to me that the White Sox in these years under Reinsdorf are like the Raiders in the final years of Al Davis. Al Davis being the one that hired Art Shell after firing Lane Kiffin with an overhead projector, wanting a certain style of player, taking Jamarcus Russell, a big armed quarterback with character concerns, over Calvin Johnson, maybe one of the most generational wide receivers of all time back in the 2007 draft, or was it 06 draft? I can't remember. But that the owner thinks he knows everything. And talking about the plane that the White Sox charter, I thought was really interesting in that it kind of shows that Reinsdorf feels like there are certain amenities that they don't need to have. I thought it was really interesting, and I didn't realize this, that the White Sox analytics staff is so small that they actually use an outside company to actually cultivate a lot of their analytical data, but people don't actually know what it means. People are looking at these sets of data and have no idea what it means or how to correlate it. And then there's the concern about scouting in terms of the lack of attention to detail when it comes to scouting reports. Now, look, the old school way of baseball, I think, worked for a long time. And I think that there are instances where it could work again. But the game has shifted to a highly analytical model. And in the words of, I don't think Billy Beane himself actually said this, but in the words of Brad Pitt playing Billy Beane, you have to adapt or die. And unfortunately, for Jerry Reinsdorf, he has not adapted. He has made everything insular. He hired somebody that Ken the Hawk Harrelson fired as manager 34 years ago. The White Sox, you know, Reinsdorf in last season's offseason press conference saying that one of his favorite players was David Eckstein. You can't win in modern baseball with a bunch of David Ecksteins. Now, I do believe that the art of the hit and run has been lost. The art of the sacrifice bunt has been lost. And we have been overcome by the launch angle revolution. There needs to be a little bit of a return to baseball normalcy. But I think what this article did, and I'm not going to recount it in full, but I think that when you talk about, not paying for a better charter plane and having issues with your lead broadcaster, Jason Benetti, like he's texting broadcasters in the middle of the game, telling them, what to talk about or criticizing what they want to talk about. I don't know anybody that could do their job well having their boss, especially in a position like a play-by-play broadcaster, having their boss critique them from a perch while watching the game or listening to the game. Like I would go crazy. I would put my phone away. In fact, I wouldn't even have my phone on me. I'd put it in my backpack. Why does anybody need to call me when they know I'm doing my job? That would have been the philosophy I had. But it really, and for those of you, either if you got a New York Times subscription or an athletic prescription, I think that there are decisions in terms about who had more influence, Kenny Williams or Rick Hahn, and how the White Sox operated on a day-to-day basis. Obviously, the thing that keeps getting recounted as well is the White Sox social media team releasing the graphic, hiring Tony La Russa as manager, and then in the top right corner, them seeing that AJ Hinch's signature was on it. And I think that this article I advocated for Bruce Bochy at the time because living in San Francisco, I know how great of a manager Bruce Bochy was. And I think a lot of people saw that during the Texas Rangers 2023 World Series run. It was pretty clear in this article that Rick Hahn was going to hire AJ Hinch. It was clear that Rick Hahn was going to hire AJ Hinch. And then Jerry Reinsdorf steps in and decides he's going to hire Tony La Russa and caught everybody off guard. And Rick Hahn, famously at that press conference, just feeling like he was being held hostage. And I think that Rick Hahn is somebody that, given everything that went on over the past couple of years, probably a lot better that he could have resigned earlier and maybe made a statement about the direction of where the franchise was going. But it doesn't paint Reinsdorf in a good light. And it certainly paints Chris Getz as somebody that is in over his head. Not to mention that the White Sox had two different scandals involving minor league managers with Getz as the director of player development, the issue with Omar Vizquel and the issue with Wes Helms. So there's a lot in this organization that needs to change, mainly starting with ownership. But it doesn't sound like Reinsdorf wants to sell the team. In fact, in the article, it says that he was quoted as saying, if I die, keep the Bulls, sell the White Sox. Because I don't think he wants his family's imprint on the White Sox other than his own. And it's been pretty widely reported that his involvement in day to day operations is significantly higher with the White Sox than it ever was or is with the Bulls. So I'll be really curious to see if Reinsdorf actually addresses what's written in this article. And I'll be curious to see how many people, if he does have an end of season press conference, how many people will actually address him about what's been written about him. A lot of people spoke on anonymity because it just paints Reinsdorf in a light as being a very cheap and meddling owner. I'm not encouraged by any significant change moving forward. You know, I remember when the Bulls parted ways with John Paxson and Gar Forman, a lot of people thought that change was never going to happen. But there may have been more of an influence from his son Michael Reinsdorf than anything from Jerry. I don't think you're going to have the same thing on the White Sox side. It truly may end up being that nothing changes until Jerry Reinsdorf dies, because it does not look like this team is going to be sold in his lifetime. And that is unfortunately the reality that anybody supporting this product is going to have to face. It is sad, but it's sadly the reality that White Sox fans know all too well. And on that note, we are going to say goodbye here on this edition of Bleav in White Sox. Thank you so much for joining us. We will wrap up the season at some point early next week, and hopefully the White Sox are going to have a new manager in place by the time that the first week of October hits. Thank you again for watching or listening, whichever you prefer, and we will talk to you around the corner here on Bleav in White Sox.